Hello everyone, I am on my own today. Coda was not able to join me for this topic, but before we get into the topic, like, subscribe, share, do all the things. It really does help out the video and it makes Coda smile. When our videos do well, it really does bring a smile to his face, so definitely do that. If you want bonus content, we have some membership options available here on YouTube as well as Patreon. Patreon definitely does have some better perks, so if you're considering it, definitely check out what we have to offer over there. But if you want to join here on YouTube, that is an option for you as well. And that just helps us continue to do what we're doing here on the podcast and just gives us your support, and we really do appreciate it. Today's topic is something that I've been putting a lot of thought into recently, and I think that it's something that we don't often think about or consider when we talk through punishments, and that is really, how do you maintain an emotional connection throughout the punishment experience? So when we talk about domestic discipline on this podcast specifically, we are typically talking to an audience of people that are in committed relationships, whether that is long-term committed relationships or marriages, but we are typically talking to couples that have a romantic connection in their relationship. And so when we think through punishments, our romantic connection, our emotional connection to each other as a couple doesn't just go away. That's not something that's outside of the connection that we have. It's really something that should come together in harmony with all the other aspects of our relationship to draw us closer. Because the goal of punishment is first to offer a consequence for bad behavior. That's the whole reason we have punishments, is that when bad attitudes, bad behavior, unacceptable behavior happens, then punishments come into play. And so that is the first and most primary reason to include punishment and spanking into your relationship, is to have a consequence. But beyond offering consequence, it also offers a chance for the taken in hand to be reconciled into the relationship after making a mistake. And that reconciliation is an emotional process of understanding that I did something wrong. I either broke trust, broke confidence, I didn't fulfill my responsibilities, I did something that was detrimental to the growth and success of my relationship, and now I'm being punished so I can be reconciled back into my relationship, so that I can have that forgiveness, forgive myself, and come back into my relationship in a meaningful way, in a way that is honoring to the goals and the growth that we want to see. And so that's the second aspect of punishment, and why punishment is an important part of domestic discipline. And then the third aspect is part of the punishment process is to draw us closer together as a couple. When a mistake happens as a taken in hand, it creates division. My mistakes, my misbehaviors, my forgetfulness, or not fulfilling my responsibilities, not doing what's expected of me, that creates division between me and my head of household. And so what that does is it creates a break in the emotional connection that I have with my head of household. And so punishment really does play a key part in bridging that divide and reconnecting us emotionally to each other, so that we can come back together in the oneness of our relationship, so that we can move forward with that shared vision, with those shared goals and um, oh, to have success in our relationship moving forward. And so to focus on how do we maintain that connection, that emotional connection throughout the punishment experience, and how do we allow ourselves to be open to that level of reconciliation is an important aspect of the overall punishment experience and of the overall domestic discipline relationship. And so the first aspect of being emotionally connected to each other throughout the punishment experience first comes into play with mindset. And so Coda and I have both talked about before how we try to set ourselves up for success in the punishment by really focusing on our mindsets. For him, that means that he needs to really focus and assume that mindset of being my disciplinarian in that moment, stepping into that authority and really understanding that he is doing, like, he is punishing me because I earned it, and it's for my betterment, it's for my growth, that he is not being tyrannical in his leadership by imposing punishment, but that it really is a good thing for our relationship. That's the mindset that he needs to focus on, and he's talked about that before in a podcast. My mindset is I need to really assume responsibility for the action or behavior or mistake that led to this consequence. I need to be open, vulnerable, and soft to my correction. I need to understand that I am the one that created the need for this punishment to happen. So I don't need to be defensive. I don't need to think that Coda is doing this to me or he's imposing this on me. I really need to take ownership over the fact that my behavior is what led to the punishment being necessary. Being able to understand that I'm responsible for why I'm being punished lends to being able to be apologetic, to be able to assume responsibility and to ask for that forgiveness. And so if I go into a punishment with an attitude of being apologetic, of understanding that my behavior is the reason I'm being punished, then I can be open to Coda extending that emotional connection to me throughout the punishment. If I go in defensive, if I feel justified in my behavior, if I'm feeling like I don't agree with being punished, then I can almost guarantee that I'm going to be very guarded and I'm going to be very defensive and I'm going to be very emotionally unavailable to the punishment process and to that connection being restored and rebuilt, which is why I talked a lot about what to do if you don't feel like you deserve a punishment and how to work through those feelings, because before a spanking happens, it really is important to work through that so that you can go into the punishment with a proper mindset. Now, I've heard stories about people that, taken in hand isn't necessarily feeling completely vulnerable or emotionally available, and the punishment is able to work those feelings out as it goes along. So it really, I guess, depends on personalities and how you receive certain things. But for me, I really do need to walk into that space and go into that punishment initially with that emotional availability being open. And so that's the first part, is really work on your mindset. The second part of that is when you start the punishment, understand that you are still a romantically connected couple. You are still emotionally invested in each other and in the relationship, that this is not a punitive process. Punishment is necessary, but it's not void of our connection to each other as a couple. In fact, it should be the opposite. Like, punishment really should be an expression of our connection to each other as a couple and in our connection to our roles within the relationship. And so it makes a world of difference if your head of household can start the punishment with an affirmation that the love and devotion that he has for you is still intact. So that it kind of starts the punishment off with just this aspect of, we are going to make things right between us because things aren't right now, but that doesn't degrade the love and connection that we have, but it is something that we need to take care of. And kind of having that attitude and that mindset going into it, and letting that be the driving force behind how you lecture, how you deliver the punishment. Lectures should be direct. They should be very, strict. There really shouldn't be any yielding in the standard of what you've set. Being loving and being kind and maintaining that emotional connection does not mean that you are lowering the standard of the home and lowering the standard of the relationship, or that you are not going to deliver a hard spanking that hurts, right? Because in essence, it is unkind not to fully punish, not to give the consequences that are necessary to drive that change and to drive that growth. That's actually unkind and that's unloving. And so don't think that by reminding your taken in hand that you love her and that you are a connected couple, that that's somehow going to make the punishment less effective. It really won't. Again, your lecture should be very direct. It should be very clear that she made a mistake and that what she did was unacceptable and it will not be tolerated, and that is not going to ever happen again. And the spanking itself should be hard. It should be hard for her to bear. It should be hard to take. It should be a painful experience. It should be something that she does not want to repeat anytime soon, if ever, right? But that doesn't degrade the fact that you still love her, that you still care for her, that you care about her well-being, and that you are doing this as an act of love towards her. Now, on a physical level, during the spanking itself, one thing that you can do that really just is reassuring and really does maintain a connection as a couple is, if you can tell that she is having a really hard time, just to maybe pause a minute and just kind of rub her back and say, you can do this. Or even to say, like, you know, I understand that this is really hard for you, but you've earned this punishment, and so we're gonna do it. But you've got this. You can do this. You can bear it. Just a reaffirmation of the fact that you understand that she's having a hard time, that it's a hard punishment to bear, that she is experiencing some really unpleasant consequences, and that you have empathy for that, but that doesn't take away the consequence. And I think that that's something that you really have to kind of strike a balance with, because you want to be empathetic, you want to be kind, you want to be caring, you want to maintain that emotional connection, but you don't want that to degrade the consequence. You don't want that to make it to where you're delivering a lighter, softer spanking. You don't want to think that the only way to be kind is to take away some of the severity of the punishment. again, you don't want to do that. So definitely strike that balance, be empathetic with your words, but also deliver the consequences and the punishment that she's earned. I also really appreciate when Coda just does have the ability to place his hand on the small of my back to where it's almost like a non-verbal way to say we're in this together. We are going through this together. Yes, it's my consequence, but it is his expression of authority. And not only do I need to express my submission by accepting my punishment, by staying in position, by um, oh, following his direction throughout that punishment, listening to his words, responding appropriately. He needs to express his authority over me by delivering the punishment that he deems necessary, that he has chosen to give me. And so there really is this beautiful exchange of me coming and expressing my position as his taken in hand, him expressing his authority over me as my head of household. And it's just this really beautiful exchange that kind of just reaffirms our relationship, it reaffirms our roles, and it puts both of us back into proper position. Because when misbehavior happens, especially something that is disruptive to us as a couple, like being argumentative, or maybe if I lose my cool and I end up raising my voice or something like that, that really is disruptive to the harmony of our relationship. So, and it puts both of us into these like off balance headspaces where, maybe he doesn't feel like he has as much authority anymore because he feels like I just went off the rails, and I definitely don't feel submissive in those moments. So punishment, not only does it offer the consequence for the unacceptable behavior and it rectifies me back into the relationship, but it also puts both of us back into our proper positions in the relationship so that we can move forward in a way that really does honor what we want out of our relationship and what we expect from ourselves and from each other. And so don't discredit the importance of a well-placed hand or a reassuring word during the spanking itself. Again, you have to balance that with lecture because you still want this punishment to be a tool for learning. You still want the punishment to act as a consequence and to be a motivation to not repeat that behavior. So you really want to balance the harshness of a lecture, the strictness of your words, the severity of the spanking itself. You want to balance that with some reassurance and some connection so that you get the most positive outcome possible. Now, after spanking is done, during that aftercare period, during that reconnection, that is when you have the most opportunity to reconnect as a couple. Not only is your taken in hand just been punished, they're probably feeling very submissive towards your leadership in that moment. They're feeling rectified into the relationship again. They are feeling very humble for having to face the consequences of their actions. They're probably very apologetic. At least this is kind of the emotional process that I go through. And I don't think I'm super unique in that experience. They're very apologetic. They are seeking that forgiveness. They're offering those apologies. It is really important to accept their apology, to reaffirm that you have forgiven them, to reaffirm that you expect better from them because you know that they're capable of doing better. And so you want to reaffirm all of those things, but you also want to reaffirm the love and care that you have for your taken in hand. Now, one of my favorite ways that Coda does this is that right after a spanking, he draws me in for a very deep hug. And really, I need that physical touch connection to my head of household in those moments for him to say, you are, it's nonverbal, but it's a way for him to say, you're mine. I'm not letting go of you. Nothing you can do is going to drive me away. It's almost like he's saying that he will deal with my behavior through a punishment. After the punishment, he is there and our relationship is there, and it affirms that we are better together, and he is not going to let these mistakes drive us apart. And so having that like physical, like bear hug type of like just really just intense physical like connection at that point affirms those feelings in my mind. Now, other couples, Coda and I do not do this, but other couples do engage in sexual intimacy post a spanking. If that is something that affirms your relationship and creates that connection to one another, there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people often mistake having physical intimacy after a punishment. They mistake that for fetishizing punishment. And that's not the case, because those would be very separate actions, right? You would have the punishment, you would have emotional reconnection, and then physical reconnection through sexual intimacy. And those are very different stages. You are not creating a fetish out of the punishment itself. At least you shouldn't create a fetish out of the punishment, because that creates a whole host of its own problems. But there's nothing wrong with being physically and sexually intimate in your domestic discipline relationship. That's part of how we express our connection as a couple, and that's part of a healthy relationship. And so if that is something that is desirable to both of you in order to create and reaffirm your connection as a couple, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Do not feel like you have to separate that completely from your punishment just because you are trying to not create a fetish out of the punishment. Again, that's something that Coda and I have never really been drawn to that as immediately after punishment, but there's nothing wrong with it if that is something that you find value in recreating that connection as a couple. One thing that Coda and I do after a punishment is that for harder punishments, sometimes he'll put me to bed just to rest and take a little bit of a nap, or a little bit of just a rest period right after a very harsh punishment. But for most punishments, we tend to spend time together. And whether that is cuddling up in bed and talking, or watching a show together, or whatever the case may be, we take a few moments, we usually about 30 to 45 minutes, where we are just together to have that reconnection as a couple, to kind of reaffirm the trajectory of our relationship and reaffirm our roles and have some interaction with each other, so that we can kind of re-solidify how things are going. So that's what I would say about maintaining connection throughout the punishment, is that you want to really just work on your mindset going into punishment. Make sure that you understand the role that you have, whether that is the role of being the authority figure, the disciplinarian, but also uh, reminding yourself of the love and connection that you have with your taken in hand. If you're taken in hand, understanding your responsibility in the fact that you are facing a consequence. Do not hold any type of animosity towards your head of household for punishing you. Understand that you are really responsible for the punishment. Um, and being open to that emotional connection from them and being open to your corrections so that you can go into that process vulnerable and open and soft to that connection. Affirm that you really are connected together and going through this process together. The connection and the love you have for your partner, don't let that become a way for you to degrade or lessen the punishment. The punishment still needs to be effective. It still needs to offer correction and guidance and be a lesson. And the pain of a spanking still needs to be enough to offer that deterrent for future misbehavior. So make sure that you are punishing thoroughly, that you are punishing effectively, but in a way that honors the fact that you have love and connection for your partner. And then use that time after a punishment to really reconnect, whether that is physically, emotionally, or both. And that is kind of the process that we go through to try to maintain our emotional connection during a punishment. Definitely something that is still a work in progress in our relationship, but it's something we're becoming more aware of so that we can consciously work on it so that punishment will become a much bigger asset to our relationship, to facilitating that closeness and that bond that we share. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. I hope that it gives you something to think about. If you haven't thought about this concept before, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and we will talk to you next time.